Hey there, everybody. We are going to be doing a quick comparison review between the Asics Superblast and the new Asics Magic Speed 4. We've been getting a lot of questions about comparing these two shoes because on paper there are some similarities that start to pop up. And so we wanted to go in and have Matt give a little bit of a comparison review between these two models. So I have experience in the Superblast, and I only have very minimal experience in the Magic Speed 4. So we're going to let Matt take most of this. But these two shoes are being compared because they both have some of the similar foam properties, they have some similarities in bending stiffness, but they have different components that make that bending stiffness a little bit unique and distinct. They both have higher stack heights, all this kind of stuff. So Matt, what's been your initial take on your comparison between these two models and how they fit with one another or against one another?
Yeah, so I'm surprised because on like initial feel, they are different, but a lot of the components, like you said, are very similar. They both have Flight Foam Turbo for the midsole, very similar stack heights, although just a couple millimeters different, but both stiff. Both now in the training realm, which if those of you that want to watch my comparison review with the Magic Speed version 3, version 4 is very different. It's now a plated trainer. And although the Superblast isn't plated, it's certainly stiff. So a lot of similarities initially, but there's some things in the upper and ride that still differentiate them that we're going to try to go into and hopefully clarify for you. Because while they're similar, and while the Magic Speed 4 might be a good replacement for those of you that can't find the Superblast 2, because it really hasn't had a ton of availability lately, there are some things that you might want to consider. For me, the really big takeaway from this is that the Superblast is the better long distance shoe. The Magic Speed 4 is really the one that has more versatility into up tempo and like 10K to half marathon efforts is kind of my big overarching theme, but we can get into the nitty gritty if you want to on those.
Yeah, so let's just lay out some specs for both of these. So if we're looking at the original Asics Superblast, this comes in at $200. It's got 45.5 millimeters in the heel and 37.5 millimeters in the forefoot. If we compare just stack heights and price to the Magic Speed is $170, so it's $30 cheaper. And the stack height is very similar. It's 2 millimeters less in the heel and the forefoot at 43.5 and 35.5. So both kind of have this 8 millimeter drop, and they both have a similar compound foam. But what do you think are the big differences between the two in terms of feel? Because they have to be distinct. Otherwise, I don't think Asics would try to put out a couple things that are the same, but one's $30 cheaper than the other. Right. I'm trying to figure out, that'd be my questions as someone who hasn't had a ton of experience in both. Like what makes them different?
I think one of the things you have to also keep in mind, there's an asterisk behind this as I say this, is the Superblast 2 is coming out, which as of this video, we have not tested. So I'm assuming there'll be greater differences. But at the moment, yeah, they're pretty similar. They're pretty similar weight-wise, stack height-wise, and even material-wise. But one of the things that's really different is that how the stiffness is created in these shoes does dramatically change the ride. Now, for me, between the two of those, even though they have similar stack heights and similar foams, the Superblast is the more cushioned, has a trainer of the two of them. Yes, you can still do up-tempo stuff. It's a great long-run shoe. It can handle some up-tempo stuff, but it's more geared to those longer distance effort. Like I've said this before, if I had to do an ultra marathon, the Superblast would be my shoe of choice. The ride in the Magic Speed 4 is different, where sole is much narrower than the Superblast. It does not feel as stable as the Superblast, so not the same mechanism, even though there are some sidewalls. It just feels, midfoot feels narrower. It feels to me more snappy, and the Flight Foam Turbo is just a little bit stiffer when you transition. So I like this shoe better at kind of like moderate efforts and then definitely doing some faster work. So I've used this already. The Magic Speed, I got 30 miles on it. I've used it for some faster runs. Not the fastest shoe. I wouldn't use it for like 5K, 10K efforts anymore like the Magic Speed 3, but you would use it for like maybe like that, like above 10K, half marathon, maybe marathon efforts, but I personally wouldn't do long runs just because for me, I don't find it stable enough and it's just a little bit more stiffer. So more the workout shoe, and the Superblast is more your training, long run, maybe marathon shoe, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And in terms of comparing the two other questions that I have for you, in terms of silhouette of the forefoot rocker, does one have a more aggressive forefoot rocker earlier starting? On paper, it looks like the Magic Speed 4 is a little bit more early starting and a little bit more aggressive. And do you feel that difference in rocker? Do you feel a difference in toe spring? they're about, we didn't say this, but they're about the same weight. They're within 3 grams of each
Yep.
other. So
Yep.
they're
It's
very,
similar.
very similar in that
Yep.
too. So
Yep.
what about the rocker? Does that feel different?
It does feel different. The Superblast, I have 200 miles on my pair, so I'm remembering back when I first put it on. The slightly later 4-foot rocker did make this shoe feel really stiff, which was very surprising that there was no plate. So there's still a lot of stiffness in this shoe.
Mm-hmm.
The Magic Speed 4 initially also felt super stiff. The plate was very noticeable. The foam hadn't broken in yet, but as soon as it did, I will say the 4-foot transition is smoother in the Magic Speed. At least it's broken in quicker. Both of them are totally fine, but for wanting a little quicker transition, a little bit smoother, I will say the Magic Speed 4 is better on that, or at least has more, not necessarily better.
The other distinction, well, not distinction, but the other defining feature of the Superblast for me was how much sole flaring there was and how wide the base was.
Yeah.
What is the comparison between the widths of the heel and particularly the heel and the midfoot between the two?
I mean, you can even see this for those of you watching on YouTube, that the Superblast is the much wider with much more sole flare, and again, much more inherently stable of the two of these. I really put the Superblast in the stable neutral category for that reason. I would definitely put the Magic Speed in the neutral category, even though there are sidewalls. There's not a lot of sole flare. The midfoot does narrow, and there's actually a little bit more lateral material in the midfoot than medial, which for me really pushes me medial. So those people that have some medial bias to their foot, you might not be able to use this as long, and I feel like it's exacerbated by how tall midsole is. Those of you that want some lateral, like lateral resistance, you might like this. But again, narrower sole, which makes this shoe feel more nimble. So again, despite the similar weight and stack height, the Magic Speed 4 does retain some of its like racer-esque type of thing because it feels like a more nimble shoe. Yeah, it's super tall, but the lower volume of the shoe does make it turn over a little bit better.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's, I know we're comparing the Magic Speed to the Superblast, but is there any similarities with the racing companion like Metaspeed Paris or Edge?
Yeah.
Like, do those feel same or different?
No, so definitely not similar at all to the Paris series, but my first thought when I put on the Magic Speed 4 was that this feels like a higher stack, heavier Metaspeed Edge Plus. So people that wanted because it's still turbo, it's still plated, there's a little bit more volume on the upper. So if you wanted to like the Edge Plus, but you're just like, hey, I just want a little bit more there, I want a little bit more trainer friendly kind of feel from the Edge Plus, this would be very, very similar in terms of how it rolls, the 8mm drop, the plate, the turbo foam. I would say the Edge Plus is the more clear comparison here.
Okay, that's great. Well, if you have any other questions about either of these shoes, you can drop them below in the comments. Otherwise, go ahead.
My last thing would be on upper fit. So,
sure.
To address that, the Superblast does have a narrower upper, and most people comment that the toe box feels like it tapers quite a bit. It's a little bit lower volume, but that does break in nicely with the flexibility. The Magic Speed does have a higher volume relative to the Superblast. It's still more of that kind of slightly slim fit. It's got a little bit of toe box taper, but there's far more room here. So if you just felt like the Superblast didn't have quite enough room for you, the Magic Speed should have a little bit more. It's also got a really nice, fairly flexible heel. It's moderately flexible heel counter, so that should also do well. But yeah, just a little bit more room fit wise in the Magic Speed versus the Superblast. My last comment.
Great. And actually, I have one other question for you.
Yeah.
If people have been following you, they know a couple things. One, that you tear through outsoles like crazy, which also makes the reality of your Superblast lasting you over 200 miles really remarkable. How has the outsole of the Magic Speed 4 and the durability element compared to what you've experienced with the Superblast?
That's a great question. I will continue to test this to find this out. So far at 30 miles, there is zero wear on the outsole. So I'm expecting this to be somewhat similar, but we'll have to see. I'll have to put it through the paces to really find out.
Well, what we are going to do, fantastic. So if you want to check this out, you can comment below if you have further questions about either of these models. I love the caveat that you made regarding that the Superblast 2 is going to be coming out. We have not tested that shoe, and therefore this comparison may be less important at that point, but Superblast is still available right now, and I'm guessing it won't just go away.
Probably not.
So, this has been a question we've gotten from a lot of you, and so we wanted to address it. And again, leave a comment if you got any other questions, and we'll try to get to them. Thanks, everybody.